What if I told you the one nation the United States fears the most isn't the one with the biggest army, the largest economy, or the loudest voice, but the one that refuses to bow? This isn't about politics. This is about truth, the kind the world isn't ready to face. Behind every sanction, behind every threat, behind every headline lies a fear that runs deeper than oil, deeper than war, a fear of something that cannot be controlled. Iran didn't just survive decades of isolation. It redefined resistance. It didn't just fight back. It lit a fire that's spreading across the Muslim world. And while most nations crumble under pressure, Iran built power in silence, through sacrifice, pride, and belief. This isn't the story you've been told. It's the one they hope you never hear. So don't blink. Don't scroll. Don't look away. Because once you hear the truth, you'll never unsee it. This is why the U.S. fears Iran more than any other nation, the hidden truth. And by the end of this video, the whole world might just understand why. Iran's unshakable ideology is what truly sets it apart on the world stage. This is not just a nation with a flag and a government. It is a nation with a mission, a deeply rooted belief system forged through revolution, faith, and resistance. When the Islamic Revolution erupted in 1979, it didn't just overthrow a monarchy. It sent a shockwave through the entire Western order. For the first time in modern history, a country stood up and said no, not just to imperialism, not just to Western domination, but to the entire system of secular materialism that was being imposed on the world. Iran didn't just want independence in politics or economics, it wanted ideological independence. And that's what scared the U.S. the most. Because you can negotiate with a politician, you can manipulate an economy, you can even overthrow a government, but you can't easily destroy an idea, especially when that idea is rooted in sacrifice and martyrdom, in a spiritual belief that dying for a cause is more honorable than living in submission. The ideology of Iran is built on resistance, not just against occupation or injustice, but against moral decay, cultural infiltration, and the erasure of identity. It rejects the modern colonial mindset, not just in military terms, but in spiritual terms. That's why every missile test, every speech, every flag waved in resistance carries more weight than just politics. It carries meaning. The United States operates through influence. It conquers without always firing a bullet, through Hollywood, through consumerism, through debt, through cultural narratives that erode tradition. But Iran is one of the few countries that built an entire system designed to resist that. It has its own media, its own scholars, its own heroes. And they're not chasing after Western approval. Iran's leaders don't want to be invited to the global dinner table. They want to build their own. That level of self-respect, that refusal to bow, makes the U.S. nervous. Because if one nation can do it, others might follow. This ideology also fuels Iran's foreign policy. Its support for movements in Palestine, Lebanon, Syria, and Yemen isn't just political maneuvering, it's ideological solidarity. Iran sees itself not just as a nation, but as a voice for the oppressed. That's not the language of diplomacy. That's the language of revolution, and the West has no formula to tame that. This ideology turns every act of defiance into a spiritual obligation. It turns sanctions into badges of honor. It turns isolation into purity. And when you face a nation that doesn't fear your punishments, that doesn't envy your luxuries, and that doesn't seek your validation, you start to realize you're not the one holding power anymore. You're just reacting to it. That's why Iran's ideology is feared, because it can't be negotiated, it can't be bought, and it refuses to kneel. Iran's regional influence and resistance network is one of the most underestimated sources of fear for the United States. While some nations rely solely on traditional military power, Iran has cultivated something far more resilient and far-reaching: a decentralized alliance of ideologically aligned movements across the Middle East. These aren't mere proxies. They are partners in a larger vision of resistance. From Hezbollah in Lebanon to the Houthis in Yemen, from the popular mobilization forces in Iraq to loyal elements in Syria and even Palestine, Iran's presence isn't marked by bases or flags. It's embedded in the hearts and minds of fighters who see Tehran not just as a government, but as a beacon of defiance. This network didn't emerge overnight. It was built through years of shared struggle, joint sacrifice, and a unifying narrative: the rejection of Western occupation, Zionist aggression, and the oppression of Muslim lands. Iran positioned itself not as a distant superpower with orders to give, but as a fellow target of imperialism. This created an ecosystem of resistance where U.S. interests are constantly challenged, not only by standing armies, but by communities who view martyrdom and struggle as honorable paths. Hezbollah, for example, is not just a militant group. It's a disciplined, politically integrated, and socially rooted force that has humbled Israeli forces more than once. The U.S. saw this during the 2006 war, when a small band of fighters, trained and armed by Iran, managed to push back one of the most advanced militaries in the world. In Yemen, the Houthis, though poorly equipped and heavily sanctioned, continue to resist a Western-backed coalition, and their missile technology, quietly linked to Iranian innovation, has struck targets far beyond their borders. In Iraq and Syria, the fight against ISIS saw Iranian-backed groups doing what many Western-trained armies could not: hold ground, reclaim territory, and sustain morale under brutal conditions. What makes this network even more dangerous to American strategic interests is its ideological nature. These groups are not simply motivated by political gains. They are bonded through a shared cause: standing against injustice, reclaiming Muslim dignity, and rejecting foreign domination. They don't need formal treaties or embassies. Their alliance is written in blood, sacrifice, and purpose. Iran is not just a country behind these movements. It's the spiritual backbone of a growing resistance that spans borders, languages, and even sects. This terrifies U.S. policymakers because traditional tools of war are ineffective against it. You can't drone ideology. You can't sanction loyalty. You can't invade every pocket of resistance. Iran's influence doesn't collapse with a regime change. It multiplies through struggle. And for every leader the U.S. tries to eliminate, 10 more rise up with greater conviction. This network has become the silent army that Washington cannot touch directly. And that's why the fear runs deep. Iran's ability to survive and even thrive under decades of crippling sanctions is one of the clearest signs of its strength and independence, and one of the key reasons the United States fears it so deeply. When most countries are subjected to the level of economic warfare Iran has endured, they collapse from within. Their systems break down, their people riot, and their governments beg for relief. But Iran took a different path. Instead of folding, it adapted. Instead of depending on outside help, it turned inward and began building self-reliance, piece by piece. From agriculture to nuclear science, from domestic production to military manufacturing. Since the Islamic Revolution, Iran has lived under some form of U.S.-led sanctions, but it was after 2010 that those sanctions became truly suffocating. The country was cut off from international banking, oil exports were slashed, assets were frozen, and companies worldwide were threatened for doing business with it. The goal was to break Iran's will. But what happened instead was something Washington didn't expect. Iran's will got strong. Its scientists developed one of the most advanced nuclear programs in the region. Its engineers built drones and ballistic missiles that rival Western technology. Its economy, while wounded, adjusted to a new reality where dependency on foreign powers was no longer an option. Iran began producing its own food, investing in local industries, and forging economic ties with alternative powers like China and Russia. It strengthened domestic supply chains and created a resistance economy, a concept where survival under pressure becomes a strategic advantage. The message was clear: you can't isolate us because we've learned to live without you. The U.S. watched in frustration as every round of new sanctions only sharpened Iran's survival skills. When the Iranian rial fell, the country didn't implode. When oil exports dropped, it found new buyers or reduced dependency. When banks were blocked, it turned to cryptocurrency, barter systems, or local currencies in trade. This self-sufficiency created something far more dangerous than just economic stability. It created national confidence. Iran's people began to see hardship not as defeat, but as a test. They became accustomed to sacrifice, and they understood that their country was being punished not for aggression, but for defiance. That gave them pride, not fear. And that's where the real problem for the U.S. lies. A population that survives without you becomes a population you can't control. A country that doesn't need your money, your systems, or your markets is a country that can stand alone. And in today's world, independence is the rarest and most powerful weapon a nation can possess. Iran didn't just endure sanctions, it used them as fuel. It exposed the limits of American pressure and proved to the world, especially other oppressed nations, that resistance is possible. That's what makes Iran so dangerous to U.S. interests. Not because it's rich, not because it's aggressive, but because it refuses to be broken. Iran's strategic geography and its control over vital global oil routes, especially the Strait of Hormuz, give it a level of influence that few nations can rival. And it's a major reason the United States fears direct confrontation with the Islamic Republic. The Strait of Hormuz is one of the most important choke points in the world. Roughly 1/3 of the world's seaborne oil passes through this narrow waterway, linking the oil-rich Gulf states to global markets. If Iran were to block or disrupt this strait, the global economy would feel it instantly. Oil prices would skyrocket, shipping routes would be thrown into chaos, and markets would tumble. This isn't theory, it's reality. And both Washington and Wall Street know it. Iran has made it clear on several occasions that if it is provoked or cornered, it holds the ability to respond in a way that hurts not just its enemies, but the global system itself. That kind of leverage is not easy to obtain, and it's even harder to neutralize. The U.S. has poured billions into military bases around the region, stationed fleets in nearby waters, and trained allied forces in Saudi Arabia and the UAE. Yet none of that changes the geographic fact. Iran is right there, sitting next to the choke point of global energy. No amount of military presence can remove that reality. In fact, the more the U.S. crowds the Gulf with ships and troops, the more volatile the region becomes, and Iran knows how to turn that tension to its advantage. This isn't just about oil, it's about unpredictability. Iran has shown that it doesn't need to block the Strait of Hormuz outright to make the world nervous. A single drone strike on a Saudi oil facility, a mysterious explosion near a tanker, or a missile launch in the wrong direction, all of these can send shockwaves through the energy markets. This constant uncertainty is a weapon in itself. The U.S. prides itself on global stability, But Iran has proven it can shake that stability anytime it chooses without firing a shot in open war. That asymmetric power is terrifying to a country that thrives on control. Iran's geography also places it at the heart of the Middle East, bordering Iraq, Afghanistan, Pakistan, and the Persian Gulf, with access to Central Asia and the Caspian Sea. That means it's not only in a strong position economically, but also strategically. It can influence multiple regions at once, from South Asia to the Caucasus to the Gulf. And while the U.S. tries to pivot toward Asia or tighten its grip on Europe, it knows it can't ignore Iran without risking major consequences. Every pipeline, every trade route, every military base in the region operates with one eye on Tehran. This is what makes Iran such a critical player and a nightmare for those who want to dominate the region. Its location is not a weakness, it's a fortress. Iran's cultural and revolutionary pride is a force that cannot be measured by weapons or wealth, but it's one of the most powerful reasons why the United States fears Iran more than any other nation. Unlike many countries that have been reshaped by colonialism or softened by materialism, Iran holds on to a deep sense of history, identity, and purpose. Its culture is not just about traditions or art, it's about legacy. The Persian civilization stretches back thousands of years, and that pride has been woven into the soul of modern Iran. When the Islamic Revolution took place in 1979, it didn't erase Iran's past. It merged it with something even more powerful: the spiritual conviction of Islam and the revolutionary spirit of resistance. This is not a population that forgets its heroes. Names like Imam Khomeini, Qasem Soleimani, and countless martyrs are remembered with passion. They're not treated as politicians or generals, but as symbols of dignity and sacrifice. In Iran, martyrdom is not seen as a tragedy. It's seen as the highest form of honor. And that worldview is something the West cannot understand or manipulate. You can't intimidate people who believe that dying in the path of justice is a victory. You can't bribe a nation whose spirit is rooted in divine purpose rather than personal gain. This revolutionary pride is passed down through generations. Iranian youth are not aimless. They're raised on stories of resistance, of struggle, of standing tall in the face of superpowers. That kind of education creates citizens who are not easily swayed by propaganda or tempted by material distractions. It creates a people who see themselves as guardians of a mission, not just for Iran, but for the oppressed everywhere. They believe they have a responsibility to speak for Palestine, to stand against arrogance, and to defend their faith with both word and action. And this conviction scares the U.S. more than any weapon ever could. Because when a nation is united not by fear or greed, but by belief, it becomes almost impossible to conquer. The West is used to dealing with regimes that crumble under pressure, leaders who sell out their own people for security or status, societies that forget their identity in pursuit of comfort. But Iran doesn't play by that rule book. It teaches its children to question the West, to challenge narratives, and to hold on to their values no matter the cost. That is a direct threat to the system of control that the U.S. relies on. Iran's pride is not arrogant, it's grounded. It comes from centuries of resilience, from battles won and lost, from the poetry of Hafez to the sermons of revolutionaries. It is a culture that has tasted oppression but never accepted defeat. And it is this deep, unshakable confidence in who they are and what they stand for that makes Iran a nation the U.S. cannot intimidate, cannot reshape, cannot ignore. The greatest hidden fear the United States has regarding Iran is the potential for it to ignite a broader Islamic awakening, one that transcends borders, sects, and political divisions. Iran represents more than just a nation state. It embodies a movement that challenges the very structure of Western hegemony in the Muslim world. For decades, the Muslim Ummah has been fragmented, divided by colonial borders, weakened by dictatorships, and distracted by internal disputes. But Iran's resistance model, its unapologetic defiance, and its unwavering voice for the oppressed have begun to inspire something deeper, a sense of unity rooted not in nationalism, but in shared Islamic values and collective dignity. Iran has consistently supported movements in Palestine, Lebanon, Iraq, Syria, and Yemen, not just as political allies, but as brothers in faith and resistance. These connections go beyond Shia identity and into something larger, a unified front against oppression, corruption, and Western domination. Iran speaks a language that resonates with many Muslims around the world, a language of honor, sacrifice, and divine justice. While many regimes in the Muslim world align themselves with Western powers for economic or military support, Iran positions itself alongside the oppressed, even if it means being isolated, sanctioned, or vilified. This positioning has planted seeds of inspiration. Young Muslims in Egypt, Nigeria, Malaysia, and even the West see in Iran a different model, one that prioritizes sovereignty over submission, dignity over dollars, and principle over popularity. Iran's message is simple but powerful. It is possible to be a Muslim nation that stands tall, refuses to bow to imperial powers, and defends the rights of others without compromise. That message, if it spreads, becomes more dangerous than any missile or nuclear program. It threatens to awaken a generation that no longer sees Western values as the ideal or Western intervention as necessary. The U.S. doesn't fear Iran because of its military strength alone. It fears the idea of Iran becoming a spiritual and ideological center for Muslims worldwide, especially in a time when so many feel disillusioned by corrupt rulers and lost identity. The West has maintained control over the Muslim world by dividing it, by turning Sunnis against Shias, Arabs against Persians, moderates against radicals. But Iran's influence threatens to reverse that divide by calling everyone back to a common cause: resistance against injustice, pride in Islam, and unity in the face of tyranny. If Muslims across sects begin to look past their differences and see a shared struggle, if they begin to prioritize liberation over division, the entire power structure the U.S. relies on begins to crumble. Iran, with all its flaws, represents that dangerous spark, the one that could light a fire too large to contain, and in that fire, Western dominance in the region could be reduced to ashes. That's the fear they never say out loud. Not a war with Iran, but a world inspired by it. So when you strip away the headlines, the politics, and the propaganda, what you find is this: the United States doesn't fear Iran because of its weapons or its economy or even its alliances. It fears Iran because Iran represents something it cannot control: an unshakable belief, a proud identity, a people rooted in sacrifice, and a defiance that doesn't bend under pressure. It fears a nation that has learned how to survive in the dark, build in the shadows, and rise in the face of every attempt to break it. It fears a revolution that still breathes, a resistance that still echoes, and a spirit that still burns in the hearts of millions far beyond Iran's borders. This fear is not about what Iran has done, it's about what it could awaken: a global resistance, a spiritual revival, a united front built not on politics, but on principle. And that's a power no drone, no dollar, no diplomat can silence. The truth is, Iran is not just standing, it's standing tall, and the world is watching. Thank you for walking with me through this truth, the one hidden behind noise, headlines, and half-truths. If you made it this far, then you're someone who seeks more than just answers. You seek understanding. Keep questioning, keep digging, and keep standing for what matters, because truth, once found, demands courage. Good luck on your journey. And may your heart always be guided by purpose, not pressure. Stay strong, stay aware, and thank you for listening.